Hey everybody, welcome to Matt Connarton Unleashed, the television edition. This week's television edition, new and improved, now with 5% real juice. You know I'm telling the truth because it says it right on the package. Couldn't put it on there if it wasn't true, right? 5% real juice. Anyway, so good to have you with me. Really quick, before we get to the unpleasantness of our first topic, if you're watching us live on Wednesday, we do have a big event coming up this weekend, Saturday, the 21st of June. Beginning at 10 a.m., we got another psychic event at the Healing Tree Wellness Center and Spa in Londonderry, New Hampshire. So, like I always say, if you're in the area, I'd love to see you, and if you're not, it's worth the drive. So, this one is put on by the Healing Tree itself, and Norm will be there, of course, Norm Moody from Norm and Friends, and a lot of other readers will be there, and some vendors and stuff. And the Healing Tree is a really, really cool place. And I work there. I'm the hypnotherapist there. I'm not a psychic, although looking at what's going on in Iraq, I almost wonder if I do have some psychic ability, because somehow I predicted all this. But we'll get to that in a moment. Hence the unpleasantness. I am not happy about the turn of events, the completely predictable and preventable turn of events. But anyway, so we'll get to that. But yeah, this Saturday, please join us. It's either from 10 to 4 or 10 to 5 at the Healing Tree in Londonderry, New Hampshire. Very, very cool place if you haven't been there. So come on down, say hello. I'd love to see you. Like I said, I'll be there representing what I do, hypnosis and hypnotherapy. Not that you could tell that I'm a hypnotist necessarily from my behavior on this program, but I can actually be very soothing and relaxing as well. So, but I'm pretty mad about Iraq, and I'll tell you where I place the blame, and it's not Obama. But before we get rolling, too, if anyone wants to chime in, if you happen to be watching the show live, you can call the number on your screen. If there is no number on your screen, it's because you're not watching live, which is okay. We do have several replays, and you can find all the information on where you can see the show, or I should say when you can see the show, at highpmnation.com/MCUTV. We have all the times listed there because the show does replay several times after the live airing Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. We also have, of course, links to the archives. We archive all the shows online at IPM Nation. And, of course, we have an active chat room. So if you want to opine, if you want to communicate with me or with other viewers at any point during the show, you can at IPMNation.com/MCUTV. Just log in and chat. Of course, you can access it anytime during the replays as well. Like I said, if you want to talk to other viewers. Also, too, don't forget Facebook, the Facebook page for Matt Connarton Unleashed. Please like it if you haven't done so already. And you can also hit me up on Twitter anytime. At IPM Nation is the Twitter handle. And let's get right into it. And I'm actually not going to spend, I promise, I'm not going to spend the whole show on Iraq. What I have to say really probably won't take very long, and then we'll go from that into, we'll probably transition into installment number, 172 of our ongoing series, Republicans Say the Darndest Things. So we have that to look forward to as well. But let's address Iraq. And I don't want to spend too much time on it because I did spend, I think, pretty much the entire show on it Thursday night of last week on the radio edition of Matt Connarton Unleashed, every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Dr. Kevin Radio Network, dkrn.net. You can also get there through the IPMNation.com website. But, I was pretty worked up Thursday night. Like I said, this was all predictable. I've never spent a day of my life working in government or in the military doing any kind of military strategic planning. I've never been directly involved in foreign policy in any way. I've never worked for or been Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense, or I've never been the president or the vice president. I've never been the national security advisor or worked in the office of the NSA. I have no hands-on experience with any of these issues, foreign policy issues. I'm not an expert on the Middle East by any means. And yet, somehow, I foresaw all of this. Not just me, a lot of people did. Maybe I am psychic. Maybe I do have some untapped psychic ability. Or maybe I just have some basic common sense and could see that this is what was going to happen. And if you go back and watch or listen to old shows, whenever this subject has come up, I've always said, as soon as we pack up and leave Iraq, it's all going to fall apart. Granted, it wasn't immediate. It wasn't like, the next day. But pretty close, huh? And by the way, the same thing's going to happen with Afghanistan. As soon as we pack up and leave, it's all going to fall apart. Completely predictable. Wherever there is sectarian violence, wherever you have factions going to war periodically, like you have the Sunni and the Shia in Iraq, it's not helpful to introduce ourselves into the equation. It just upsets the apple cart. I think back to pre-invasion of Iraq, and don't get me wrong. Sometimes the apologists for the Bush administration will say, well, we had to get rid of Saddam. Saddam Hussein had to go. Or if you say, well, what about these alleged weapons of mass destruction that weren't actually there? Very often a Bush administration apologist will say, well, we got rid of the ultimate weapon of mass destruction, Saddam Hussein himself. People will often say that, and they think they're being very clever when they say so, when it's obviously BS. The reality is, we had him contained. Yeah, he was a bad guy, but we had him contained, and the devil and whatnot. So really, for us to go in, and Colin Powell warned Bush and Cheney. He said, if you break it, you own it. And that's what happened. So we went in, we broke it, and now we own it, and we have tried to disengage, and it's clearly not working, because now we might be going back in some form or fashion. In fact, we probably are. Doesn't mean that there will be combat troops on the ground in Iraq. It may be done with airstrikes. It may be done with drones. I don't know what this is going to look like. Obviously, there's a lot of pressure for us to respond, and so I think we're going to have to. This idea too, and I've really, when it comes to Obama, I have my own criticisms of him, and there are some things where I feel obligated to stick up for him because, sometimes the other side gets a little carried away, I think, and is a little unfair with some of their criticism. We'll discuss that a little bit more too as the show goes on, but of course, because we exist in this hyper-partisan reality, Republicans are their first go-to as well. We shouldn't have left Iraq when we did. That was a mistake. We should not have packed up and left until we were certain. Until we were certain that the situation was stable. And Obama wasn't able to negotiate a new status of forces agreement with Maliki, so it's all his fault. If we had just stayed, everything would have been fine. It's BS, and they know it's BS. The reality is, I remember McCain during the 2012, the 2008 election during the campaign saying, the reality is, he would say, Obama is saying he's going to get us out of there if you elect him. But I'm telling you, we're going to stay as long as we have to. And if that means we have to be there for 100 years, that's what we'll do. Of course, no one had an appetite for that. And he knew that. But this is what he said. He was trying to come off as the, the elder statesman, the responsible guy. But the fact is, well, we'll never know if this is the fact. I shouldn't say that, but I firmly believe this. I'm absolutely convinced. This idea that, oh, if we had just stayed a bit longer and then made sure everything was cool and then left, it's BS. And they know it. It doesn't matter how long we stayed. If Obama had waited and left it for the next president to deal with, well, just I'm going to ride out my presidency and we'll keep the status quo in place in Iraq. And then the next president came in. What if suppose we got a President Rand Paul who doesn't believe in this interventionist, adventurist, completely off the rails foreign policy that the Bush administration did, and then Obama had to continue with. And Rand Paul came in and said, well, that's it. I don't agree with this. We're getting out. We're not the world's policeman. We're getting out, because that's his attitude. Despite being a Republican, he's not particularly hawkish in a lot of ways. What would have happened then? Same thing. The whole thing would have fallen apart. What's going to happen when we leave Afghanistan? The whole thing is going to fall apart. And it will all have been for nothing. It's not Obama's fault. He pulled out on his watch. It doesn't matter who it would have been. It's just heartbreaking, because obviously it was a mistake to go in, whether anyone wants to admit it or not. Tony Blair certainly isn't admitting it. I was listening to, on NPR, I heard some comments Tony Blair had made. He was asked, because he was right on board with Bush during the invasion of Iraq, to the point where some people were criticizing Blair as being Bush's lapdog or something, or really very critical of Blair. Like, why does Blair just go along with whatever Bush says? And Tony Blair still now is holding firm with this notion that Saddam had to go. Saddam was such a bad guy, he had to go. And that the world is in fact safer and better off with Saddam not there. He's still sticking to that line. And of course, now some documents have been released which shows that Blair, during the lead up to invading Iraq, and this is not conspiracy theory stuff. Let me just clarify that. I want to be clear. This is out. It's in the mainstream media. You can find it. It is now being reported. Documents have been declassified of Blair's meetings with BP during the run-up to the war. It's all about oil. It's all about money. It's all about war profiteering. See, I used to believe, and again, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I might sound a tiny bit like one here when I say this, but please try to understand that's not where I'm coming from. I'm not one of these people who thinks, a missile really hit the Pentagon on 9/11 and all that. I just, it's interesting stuff. It's interesting to speculate about. I don't particularly buy into it. But I will say this. For a long time, I believed that the Bush administration was simply arrogant. Not that I would necessarily rescind that view now. But I thought, okay, how could they have botched this so badly where they clearly were fully prepared for the invasion? The invasion was pretty quick and smooth, actually, on balance. But then they completely blew it when it came to the occupation. Because if you recall, shortly after we invaded Iraq, like I said, the invasion was pretty quick and simple. It even was humorous at one point where they had, what was his name? Baghdad Bob, I think was the nickname that the American media gave to him. This guy, he was the information minister, I think, and which is just another way of saying publicist for the government. And he was claiming that, oh no, the Americans haven't even gotten as far as Baghdad yet. And meanwhile, there's American tanks rolling behind him, and he's just in denial right toward the end. It became a farce at one point. But then, boy, not long afterward, it all started falling apart, didn't it? Almost as though the Iraqis, even though we were told over and over again by people like Cheney, by people like McCain, who I think must hold some sort of record for being wrong on foreign policy, He certainly is not a psychic. We were told we'll be greeted as liberators. They will love us for, well, how would you like it if someone said, if Canada said, we don't like the way America is, what America does, and we don't like this Obama guy, so now we're going to invade you. Obviously that's not going to work out. Of course not. Now, I used to think they were arrogant because they really thought it was going to be easy. I kind of look at it a little bit differently now. I think now it is possible that they knew exactly what they were doing, and they were counting on us getting bogged down in Iraq because war is a business. Somebody's always making money off war. These companies like Halliburton and Bechtel with their no-bid contracts. And, of course, Cheney came from Halliburton. And, and then we get these, we hire these companies like Blackwater, which I know has since changed its name because they got a lot of bad PR. There's a lot of money to be made in war. It's nice work if you can get it. And I think that's what this has all been really about. Going into Iraq, getting bogged down, going into Afghanistan, getting bogged down. I mean, if you think about it logically, why would we go to Afghanistan actually believing that we could make everything fine, we'll kill all the Taliban, everything will be great. The Taliban also, we of course propped them up in the 80s. The Mujahideen during our proxy war against the Soviets, because we were fighting the Soviets in a proxy war in Afghanistan. My enemy's enemy is my friend. If you look back through history, there's a lot of that kind of behavior, those kinds of attitudes in terms of foreign policy. But, how did it go for the Russians, the former Soviets in Afghanistan? It's the place where great empires go to die. But we're stuck there. And, I was talking to my dad on, we had lunch the other day, kind of pre-Father's Day. And we kind of agreed that, it would have been one thing to go to Afghanistan, kill some terrorists, make a statement, and then get out. To say to the world, look, we're the United States. We don't tolerate this. We're going to hunt some bad guys down and kill them. And then leave. And we never should have invaded Iraq, clearly. And the part about this, too, that doesn't get talked about much, and again, this is why I really think it was just all about war profiteering. And continues to be. Obviously, there's still people making money off of this. If you think about who actually attacked us on 9/11. Now, of course, a lot of people will say, most people who objected to the invasion of Iraq will say, well, there really was no direct link between Saddam Hussein and 9/11. He and Osama bin Laden didn't even get along. They weren't exactly pals or business associates of any kind. They didn't like each other. Saddam was really not particularly a hardcore Islamist anyway. I mean, he was a secular ruler, at least on paper. Who really attacked us on 9/11? And of course, they tried to make it look like Saddam, even with all the cherry picking of intelligence that they did and all the what has become very obvious manipulation of the intelligence that they had, it still looked pretty tenuous, that link between Saddam and 9/11. It's still very hard to buy into. The part that doesn't get talked about as much is, who really attacked us. Osama bin Laden recruited most of those guys, most of the hijackers on those planes on that day were recruited from the Wahhabi tribe in Saudi Arabia. They were Wahhabis. Now, logically, if the guys who attacked us on 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia, isn't that who we should have invaded? Now, of course, for all kinds of obvious reasons, that would never actually happen, and we could not actually do that. We can't invade Saudi Arabia. We have a relationship with them. Granted, they're not a democracy, but we do have a relationship with them. We depend on their oil and so forth. And the Bush family actually is was always very close to the Saudis, the Saudi royal family, or whatever it is you call them. So, but that's who got us. And Saudi Arabia has a history of sponsoring terrorism. They're doing it now with what we're seeing in the Sunni-Shia sectarian conflict in Iraq. Some of that money to buy some of those weapons is coming from the Saudis. They're not our friends. They're our business associates. They're not our friends. They never have been. And according to the Bush doctrine, well, if you're aiding and abetting terrorists, if you're giving safe harbor and comfort to terrorists, well, we're going to come get you. So what happened? Why didn't we go get Saudi Arabia? Well, we can't. So, well, we'll do Afghanistan, close enough. Knowing that for all kinds of reasons it was a bad idea, but we still did it, and we'll do Iraq. And I think they knew exactly what they were getting into, and they didn't care. It was about controlling the oil, attempting to get control of the oil, and it was about war profiteering. It's all about the money. And it breaks my heart to think of every American family in this country who is missing someone today. Someone, a brave man or woman, who volunteered, who signed up to go and fight for and defend this country, and they get put into a situation where they're completely misused. You know, I love our military because as I've always said, you know, on this show, not on my best day do I have the nerve to strap on a weapon and go running into a place where people are actively trying to kill me. So I have enormous respect and love and admiration for anyone who makes that choice, who makes that commitment. I am in awe of the American military. I truly am. My dad's a veteran. He was in the Navy. He was during Vietnam. So to see them misused and essentially used as pawns in, again, what I feel is a business adventure, or business venture, I meant to say, or business misadventure, we'll split the difference. It's horrifying to me. And to think that there are American families now, there are American families who have to look at this. First of all, obviously, I have just enormous sympathy for any American family who lost someone over there. But to know, for anyone who kind of knows or suspects that it really was all about business, that it really was all about war profiteering, that's got to make it that much tougher. And now for these people to see the inevitable. Sunnis and Shias not getting along and fighting each other. Wow. Who knew? Well, the American government that sent your kids over to die, they knew. They knew. Because there was no way this wasn't going to happen. There was no way. And you've got Syria there, and you've got, if there is one tiny bit of silver lining to all of this, potentially it's this. There does appear to be an opening for the prospect of some cooperation between the United States and Iran. That, if that works out, that could be a positive development, the U.S. and Iran actually cooperating. Now, of course, in the grand scheme of things, well, again, it's just another example of my enemy's enemy is my friend. Okay, Iran is not our friend, and we need to be careful about who we are pretending is our friends, but and we need to continue to be concerned about their nuclear program, but but they don't like seeing what's happening. It's not good for them. But I think ultimately the Iranians would like to take full control of Iraq because, again, removing Saddam, that creates a vacuum. It's just horrifying. The whole thing is horrifying. We're going to have to go back in some way. And I will not be surprised if before the end of the Obama administration, we do see boots on the ground again in Iraq. We're stuck there. We are stuck there. And we're never going to fully break free of it. And, again, the way the right is attacking Obama on it, we shouldn't have left. Well, we shouldn't have been there to begin with. And to hear these neocons, to hear Dick Cheney and Paul Wolfowitz, and I haven't heard from Rumsfeld yet. I haven't seen Rumsfeld stick his head up yet and say something. But he might have. I don't know. But to hear these people, Bill Kristol, who's very hawkish, who's never seen a prospect of war that he wasn't in favor of, to see them now, after having been so wrong about everything, to see them now popping up on Fox News and other places and, what Obama should do is this, and this is how we need to proceed, and these are all the mistakes that he made, and it's just disgusting. These are the people who got us into this mess. Like I said, I think it was intentional. And now they have all the answers about how to get us out. Yeah, thanks. That's helpful. So, I've calmed down a little bit. Last Thursday night on the radio edition, I was pretty angry. Let's shift gears. There's, anyone who is a longtime viewer of the show, or if you listen to the radio edition of the show, you know that, one of my favorite things to do is make fun of some of these crazy Tea Party type Republicans who say very insane things. And, again, if you're new to the show, let me just clarify. I'm not a Democrat. I'm an independent, and I have a lot of criticism of both parties. In fact, last week, I was very critical of Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who's a pretty big player in the Democratic Party, and I said some pretty terrible things about her. So it's not like I just pick on Republicans. I know to some people it seems that way, but I do pick on Republicans more than Democrats in this regard. The Democratic Party does not have a crazy equivalent to the crazy faction of the Republican Party that I've seen. I may have mentioned this before, but I was talking recently with a Republican. I won't say who because it was an off-air conversation, but he was saying, don't you think that Democrats also say a lot of crazy things and they just go unreported in the media? And I said, no, I think that Democrats are a lot more disciplined. I'm not saying that Democrats never say crazy things. I'm not going to tell you that Nancy Pelosi never said anything crazy. But I do think that Democrats are more disciplined in that way. And I don't think there's an equivalency there because if there were, you would see Fox News every 5 minutes picking this Democrat apart or that Democrat apart for the crazy things that they said. So, but there is a faction. These Tea Party Republicans seem to really go out of their way to say things that are politically suicidal and to some of us seem completely insane. From Todd legitimate rape Aiken to, there's plenty of examples. We don't need to go through them all. But let's hear one of the latest examples, shall we? This stuff never gets old. This is from HuffPost. Ed Mazza wrote this. A Tea Party candidate says it's okay to stone gays to death. Now, one of my favorite things to do on the show is not only to pick these people apart, but I love it when I find something that literally sounds like it came from The Onion or some other satirical website or publication that can't possibly be true because it's so ridiculous that it can't possibly be true. Obviously, it's satire. When I find something like that, but it's real, I have to read it. So I'm going to read this to you. Here we go. Scott Esk, a Republican Tea Party candidate in Oklahoma, got into a debate on Facebook last summer in which he advocated killing homosexuals. That's at least he didn't make a campaign promise to actually do it, but he's just advocating for it. Esk wrote in comments uncovered by Oklahoma journalist Rob Morris, quote, "I think we would be totally in the right to do it. That goes against some parts of libertarianism, I realize, and I'm largely libertarian, but ignoring as a nation things that are worthy of death is very remiss." Yeah, again, this is not from The Onion. I didn't make that up. This guy actually said this. Let me read it to you one more time, because there's probably some of you that are thinking, okay, I know a lot of these Tea Party Republicans are a little nuts, but that can't possibly, I could not possibly have heard that correctly. So let me read it again. "I think we would be totally in the right to do it," again, referring to killing gays. "That goes against some parts of libertarianism, I realize, and I'm largely libertarian, but ignoring as a nation things that are worthy of death is very remiss," unquote. So, at least he acknowledges that there is something about killing gay people that, isn't necessarily very libertarian. Because, libertarians, of course, are very pro-freedom. And so, in theory, you're free to be not stoned to death if you're gay. So it's good that he acknowledges that he kind of, actually, in a way, it's kind of courageous politically for him to, he considers himself very much a libertarian, but he's not afraid to break away from the libertarians when he feels strongly that they're wrong on a particular issue, like whether or not people who are gay should be allowed to live or die. Good for him for taking a stand there. By the way, not only does it go against libertarianism, the idea that we should stone gay people to death, it also goes against Christianity, true Christianity. Of course, as longtime viewers know, I also spend a lot of time deriding an alternate version of Christianity, which I refer to as ironic Christianity, which unfortunately, the more and more I see and hear and read, the more I'm convinced that ironic Christianity is, in fact, the dominant version of Christianity. And ironic Christianity, of course, is where one professes to be a Christian, goes through the motions of being a Christian, goes to church, puts money in the collection thing, whatever, while actively having as little to do as possible with anything Christ said. So this man clearly is an ironic Christian. Not only does he hate people who are different from him, which I don't think Christ would actually approve of, not the version of Christ that I learned about in the Bible, but he actually wants to kill them, which I don't think Christ would approve of, at least the version of Christ that I learned about growing up. I was raised in a Christian home, and the dude that I learned about, I don't think he'd really be into killing gay people just because they're gay. Now, I could be wrong. Who am I, really, to speak for the Son of God? I'm not even particularly religious at this point in my life, so perhaps I'm being a bit presumptuous, but I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm just spitballing. If you disagree, there are certain things upon which reasonable people can disagree, I suppose. But I have a very strong theory that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the Prince of Peace, whatever you want to call him, that guy, probably not so much into the killing gay people. He never said in the Bible, as far as I know, that he was opposed to it. So maybe this guy's got a little wiggle room there, but I don't remember him ever actually advocating for it either. Oddly enough, I don't think there's any mention from Christ about homosexuality in the Bible. But a lot of these ironic Christians think it's important to hate them anyway. And of course, in the case of this knuckle dragger, it is important to kill them. In fact, this is so ironic, Christian, that in the Bible, isn't it Christ who says, "He among you who has not sinned may cast the first stone"? So not only was Christ really not so much about hate, but he even specifically said, don't stone people. Unless this man, Scott Esk, who is advocating for stoning gay people to death, maybe he himself is without sin. Yes, thank you, John. That's a good point. Maybe he's Jesus. He could be Christ himself. And I could be wrong. Who knows? Although I must say, when I look at this man, Scott Esk, he doesn't particularly look like the images of Christ that I'm used to seeing. The images of Christ that I'm used to seeing, having grown up a Catholic, are of a white guy with long hair and a beard, and kind of looks like almost like a hippie version of Ted Nugent. Maybe that's why Republicans love Ted Nugent so much. He kind of looks like their version of the ideal Jesus. Of course, being a white guy. So let's continue. So when pressed, Esk added, oh good, he clarifies his comments. He says, quote, "I never said I would author legislation to put homosexuals to death, but I didn't have a problem with it," unquote. This is real. Again, this is not from The Onion. This is freaking real. A guy running for public office in Oklahoma is saying this. I would never author legislation to kill gay people, but I don't have a problem with it. Well, that's good. At least he's not going to try to write it into law. Maybe it'll be like an optional thing. If you're a hateful, ironic Christian, if you want to show up for the stoning of someone who happens to be different than you and is therefore terrifying and destroying America, then feel free. But if you're really not into it, well, it's not the law anyway. You don't have to. If you'd rather maybe just stay home and stew in your hatred because you've somehow convinced yourself that hating people who are different from you is actually going to get you into heaven, then that's okay too. You don't have to come out and throw stones. So I'm glad he clarified his comments here. Esk is running for the state's House of Representatives. The primary is scheduled for June 24th. Oh, good. So the election hasn't passed yet. So anyone watching the show online in Oklahoma, you can still vote for stoning gay people. It's not too late. You'll be doing God's work. When contacted by Morris, who runs the news outlet More Daily, Esk didn't deny making the comments or back down from the rhetoric. Well, good for him, sticking to his stones on this issue. He says, quote, "That was done in the Old Testament under a law that came directly from God. And in that time," it's hard to even read this. It's so... is anyone as troubled as I am that there are people really this just inbred? And again, I'm making assumptions, but I assume, I'm not saying because he's from Oklahoma. I'm just saying anyone who would believe this, there has to have been some inbreeding in their family lineage. I try really hard to, I know it doesn't seem like it, but I try to respect everyone's religious beliefs. I really do, no matter how crazy they seem. But people like this guy or, the Westboro Baptist Church people, it's one thing to use religion to sort of justify and perpetuate your own ignorance. That's bad enough. But when people use religion to actually justify and perpetuate a certain lust for violence and actually hurting people, I don't feel badly about calling this guy an inbred is what I guess I'm trying to say. I try to avoid ad hominems, but let's see. All right, so let's get back to this quote. This is why this guy thinks it's okay to kill you if you're gay. Quote, That was done in the Old Testament under a law that came directly from God, and in that time, it was totally just. It came directly from God. I have no plans to reinstitute that in Oklahoma law. I do have some very huge moral misgivings about those kinds of sins, unquote. Yeah. By the way, and it's also, this guy is so stupid and just so committed to his hate that obviously it never even occurs to him that there's also a New Testament which addresses this, which I would think completely nullifies what happened in the Old Testament, because that's how a lot of Christians look at this stuff. It's the New Testament that's important. Granted, a lot of Christians don't necessarily see it that way because there's no mention of homosexuality in the New Testament that I know of, so you still have to rely on some things for the Old Testament, like you can't condemn gay people if you completely just sort of put aside the Old Testament, because that's where, it's an obscure passage in the Old Testament that people interpret to suit their own homophobia as being that being gay is bad. But again, this stoning is specifically addressed by Christ himself, the dude Christianity is named after, who says, hey, don't do that. Don't throw stones. The Raw Story notes that in other Facebook posts, Esk has said that laws punishing gays, it just gets better, that laws punishing gays should be instituted locally so people, quote, can decide for themselves whether they want to live in a particular community based in part of how things like this are dealt with, unquote. Okay, so I'm not even sure I understand. I mean, his logic obviously is very twisted and strange, but so it sounds like he's saying that local communities should be free to institute laws that punish gay people, so then people can decide whether they want to live in a community that stones gays to death. And if for some reason there's these people who I guess aren't right with the Lord, who somehow decide they're not okay with killing gay people, then they'll just have to move out, I guess. Or actual gay people. The comments have quickly gone viral, drawing attention to other parts of his platform, and those views aren't any less extreme. Esk wants to, quote, punish abortionists severely for their committing of murder, unquote, and punish federal bureaucrats who try to enact the provisions of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act? So, yeah, there's a lot of that kind of stuff on the right. This idea that if someone passes a law that you don't like, maybe you can punish people who actually carry it out and enact the law. It's kind of a strange way of looking at things. I would disagree with the author of this article saying that these views are not any less extreme. I think they are. I think the most extreme thing this guy has said is that it's okay to kill gay people because God wants you to. I don't think there's anything more extreme than that so far, but we'll see. There's more to the article. In addition, he's against all forms of gun licenses, wants to cut education funding, quote, which I don't consider a proper function of government, unquote, and believes the EPA, FDA, OSHA, etc., quote, have no legitimate reason for existing since they're unconstitutional, unquote. This hits on this thing about these government agencies being unconstitutional. That hits on a pet peeve of mine. Sometimes when people attack certain things as being unconstitutional, what they really mean is non-constitutional, but they conflate the two, and I think it's done intentionally. To to me, look, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a constitutional scholar, so maybe I'm talking out of turn on this, but the way I see it, something unconstitutional is something that specifically is in direct violation with the Constitution. Something non-constitutional would be something that isn't mentioned in the Constitution. For example, the interstate highway system, that's non-constitutional in the sense that there is no mention of having an interstate highway system in the United States Constitution, of course. But I don't hear anyone arguing that the interstate highway system is unconstitutional. It doesn't violate the Constitution. But sometimes people will use that word unconstitutional where it doesn't really fit. But again, I think a lot of these people who do that do so intentionally as a political way of convincing people that, well, we shouldn't have this, we shouldn't have that. I don't think that's what this guy, Scott Esk, is doing, because I think Scott Esk is too stupid with his very, very tiny brain to actually consider doing something specifically just for political points. We have a call. Hi, welcome to Matt Connarton Unleashed. Who's this?
Hey, Matt, I have a big announcement for you and I coming on my show at 4 o'clock.
You do?
Yes, I do. And the chief
Good.
of police could announce his, from Guilford, could announce his sexual identity, and we're going to come on and announce ours as a big way.
Okay, I think we kind of already... Norm, did you change?
Yeah, I went totally straight now.
Well, that is big. I not to spoil the surprise, but that is a big announcement.
Actually, I like your show today. That's what I called to talk to you about.
Oh, thank you, Norm.
You're hitting a lot of points that would make people scared or would make, or whatever, and I think that's really cool.
Thank you. Well, it's all part of coming unleashed.
Okay, we'll see you at 4.
All right, thanks, Norm. That was, of course, Norm from Norm and Friends. We'll be on it from 4 to 6 today here on MPTS, and you can watch it on IPM Nation as well. So I'll be interested to hear more of that story he was talking about there. All right, so, this is something Gary would like, the Honorable Gary S. Hopper. Esk wants to make divorce more difficult as well. That's something Gary's big on. Gary's very pro-family and wants to actually make divorce more difficult. It's interesting, too. Again, Esk, earlier in the article, there was a quote where he mentioned being largely libertarian, but libertarians, of course, oppose to making divorce more difficult. Actually, libertarians typically want the government out of the marriage business entirely. So, let's see. He's also calling for jury... Okay, I don't think Gary would go for this part. He's also calling for jury trials for divorce cases and an end to no-fault proceedings. Well, Gary does, again, he blames no-fault divorce for a lot of our social ills in this country, and actually makes a very powerful argument. I don't want to give it short shrift here, but Gary does make a powerful argument for a lot of what he says there, I think. But I don't think Gary would go for the jury trial thing for divorce cases. That's weird. I don't think he would. I shouldn't presume. I'll ask him later. But Esk also says, quote, I also don't buy into the notion that it's unfair to make somebody stay in a marriage he's unhappy with, unquote. Okay. Esk was married for 15 years until, quote, frivolous divorce raised its ugly head in the Esk home, unquote, he notes on his campaign website. You can see him speak more about divorce in the video below. Oh, I shouldn't have read that sentence. Probably that's why it's in parentheses. There is no video below for you to watch because you're watching me. But if you were looking at my MacBook right now, there's a video you could click. Esk's Facebook page contains other stunners, including a December 2013 post written shortly after Nelson Mandela's death, in which he called the former South African president a communist thug and a lowlife. No surprise there. There actually were a number of conservatives who had negative things to say about Nelson Mandela after his passing. But there were also, too, to be fair, a lot of conservatives who... there was some infighting there. There were also a lot of conservatives who had positive things and actually were very critical of some of the conservatives who said negative things. So, But I'm not surprisingly that he has these feelings about Nelson Mandela. And in November 2013, he wrote of calling 911 to report a large group of Mexicans gathered at an Oklahoma City mall geared toward Latino shoppers because he, quote, suspected that many of them were guilty of being here illegally, unquote. So he sees these Mexicans and some of them have got to be here illegally. I'm sure Oklahoma has a terrible problem with undocumented immigrants. His long rant notes that police didn't respond to his emergency call. Oh, why not? Because there was no emergency? I mean, that might be why. Esk was a computer programmer in the state's Department of Public Safety, but has since gravitated toward courier work. He also owns a window washing business. Wait a minute. He worked for the Department of Public Safety? He worked for a government agency? I thought these people didn't believe in government. And this article finishes with the following quote. He said this on his website. I look forward to applying biblical principles to Oklahoma law, unquote. There are a number of reasons why I am a separation of church and state guy. Always have been. I'm very secular in my views of how government should work. Keep God out of our government. And this freak, this knuckle-dragging Oklahoman Neanderthal, is a perfect example of why we have to have separation of church and state. I don't really know anyone in Oklahoma. I do have a number of gay friends. I would prefer not to see any of them ever stoned to death. Again, that's just me. We only have a little bit of time left, but let's get to this quickly. Our favorite former Republican presidential candidate and possible future Republican presidential candidate says, this is from BusinessInsider.com. You may have heard this story. This got a lot more mainstream media attention than the moron from Oklahoma. Rick Perry compares being gay to alcoholism. Yes, the hits just keep on coming. I'll read this quickly. It's very short. Texas Governor Rick Perry, a Republican mulling a second campaign for president, directly compared homosexuality to alcoholism while speaking in California Wednesday night. This is from a week or two ago. He said, quote, whether or not you feel compelled to follow a particular lifestyle or not, you have the ability to decide not to do that, unquote, said Perry, according to the San Francisco Chronicle. He continued, quote, I may have the genetic coding that I'm inclined to be an alcoholic, but I have the desire not to do that, and I look at the whole issue the same way, unquote. Perry made his remarks when he was asked at the Commonwealth Club of California about the Texas Republican Party's support for access to controversial reparative therapy for gays and lesbians to change their sexual orientations, the report said. Though the crowd contained many Perry supporters, quote, the comment still drew a murmur of disbelief, unquote. So Rick Perry thinks being gay is like having a disease anyway, because we regard alcoholism as a disease, and apparently Rick Perry thinks being gay is a disease, and you can also control it. Just like you can decide not to have a drink, you can also stop being gay. I'd say, I almost wanted to say unbelievable, but it's actually very believable. It is Texas Governor Rick Perry. Like I said, the hits just keep on coming. And by the way, if you don't know what that reparative therapy is, that is the pray away the gay stuff. You know, you go and you get this therapy and you pray, and then I don't know, God takes the gay away from you. I guess. The funniest thing to me about this reparative therapy, by the way, Governor Chris Christie, a Republican, signed into law in New Jersey, parents can no longer, in the state of New Jersey, send their children, if they're minors, to reparative therapy. They cannot force them to do that, which I think is phenomenal because I think it's child abuse. Anyone who sends their kids to reparative therapy, not only are you ignorant and stupid, but you're abusing your child. But I will conclude with this because we're almost out of time. But the funniest thing to me about the whole reparative therapy BS is Marcus Bachmann, the ambiguously gay husband of course, Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann. He's big into the reparative therapy and actually runs some sort of camp or clinic where you can go and pray the gay away and all that. And what's really funny to me about that is if you've ever seen or heard Marcus Bachmann speak, that dude clearly is flaming gay. And yet, he's all about this reparative therapy. It does not take a shrink to figure out what kind of psychological issues Marcus Bachmann clearly is working through with his quoting the Bible and condemning gay people and all that. It's pretty obvious what's going on there. And I do have a theory of why he and Michelle adopted a bunch of foster children instead of just having their own kids. I'm just guessing. It's just conjecture, but their wedding night might have been a little uneventful. I'm just guessing. I don't know. But the dude clearly is gay. Anyway, all right, that'll do it. Again, don't forget this weekend, if you're in the area, we'd love to see you in Londonderry, New Hampshire at the Healing Tree Wellness Center and Spa for our psychic event. I'll be there. Norm will be there. The rest of the staff of the Healing Tree will be there. A lot of great people. Please come down. 10 to 4 or 10 to 5, I'm not sure. I'll ask Norm. He'll know. That is this Saturday, June 24th. And don't forget, of course, every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern is the radio edition of Matt Connarton Unleashed, streaming live on the Dr. Kevin Radio Network at dkrn.net. You can also get there through ipmnation.com as well. And that's going to do it for now. Again, you know the drill. If you're watching us live on Wednesday, I will be back at 4 p.m. with Norm and at 6 p.m. with Gary. And that's it for now. I will talk at you all a little bit later. Thank you.